When Double Dragon made its initial release in arcades back in 1987, it was a hit amongst gamers and created a whole new genre of side-scrolling beat-em-up, as well as having a huge franchise built on the foundations of its success. The nostalgic factor bumped up considerably when the game was ported to several home consoles, including the definitive NES version. Not only did the game achieve an overwhelming amount of fame and positive reviews, but it also inspired others to develop their own beat-em-ups for the newly born genre. Some series are pretty unique with what they offer, while others are just so embarrassing they gave the genre a bad name. Unfortunately, in the case of this review, I'm focusing on the latter, and I can't think of an example much worse than Bad Street Brawler for the NES. The game was originally developed by Beam Software, a company which in my opinion had so much potential but wasn't given enough chances to show off what they were truly made of. They made notable games such as Nightshade on the NES and Shadowrun on the Super NES. Upon the release of Bad Street Brawler, it was panned by critics and gamers alike very heavily that Sean Rayleigh, under the pen name of Sean Baby, a columnist of Electronic Gaming Monthly magazine, went as far to say that it's not only one of the worst games in the NES library, but also one of the worst games of all time. When someone makes a claim as bold as that, you have to wonder how bad the game really is, and that's the purpose for this review. But before we get further, you have to note that the US version was published by Mattel, and that raises more red flags than a communist gathering, given Mattel's notorious reputation in the game industry. In fact, some say that Beam Software had nothing to do with the NES ports, so when seeing their mark on a game, don't keep your expectations high. I mean, seriously, do not keep your expectations good for this one. Bad Street Brawler plays out like many other beat-em-ups, but not in a good way. You assume the role of Duke Davis, a guy that the game describes as being a former punk rocker and the, quote, world's coolest martial artist. I kid you not. That's literally how they describe him. You go from stage to stage beating up bad guys mindlessly without any purpose of doing so. The game doesn't make clear of why you're fighting these people or what kind of cause it's all for. You just go street to street beating up ugly gangsters, gorillas, and literally old ladies throwing pocketbooks who look more like weightlifting midgets. Yeah, this is turning out to be a real friendly start for Davis. It's true that many beat-em-ups don't have stories tied to the gameplay, but if you're not going to give the game a story, why bother describing who the character is? Does it actually matter who you play as, just as long as you beat up shit? Hell, you could have a tofu mugging people and it wouldn't make a lick of difference. Now before I dive into the bad side of this game, I should address the good aspects, what little there is. The animation is kind of decent, although not remotely attractive, and some of the elements in the game are original, while at the same time, very, very strange. Unfortunately, those are the only positive aspects I could conjure from this. Everything else jumps the shark. Each level gives you different attack abilities, and some of them can be either ineffective towards enemies or flat out ridiculous, like the Stooge Punch for instance. This would be funny if you were actually playing as a stooge, but I can't imagine any buffed up guy performing such tactics, and you have to get used to these moves right after you got used to the last set of attacks you had before, making you confused as to what direction the game wants you to go. Even worse is that due to the lousy hit detection, you won't get much knocks into the enemies, and even when you do, they can negate your attacks and kick your ass on more occasions than necessary. Another thing about the enemies is their unusual behavior. Some of them can be either painfully easy to take out or just annoying when it comes to smacking you down that it becomes impossible to recover. Adding to the confusion, some of the regular enemies can appear in boss fights, vice versa with the bosses becoming regular enemies. With the exception of a few, pretty much all the bosses are insultingly easy to clobber with no strategy involved, especially with bosses that surprisingly deal a hefty amount of damage to you, but just one kick from you, they immediately slam into the pavement. There's really no reason to make a boss ruthless to a point where it takes only one hit to kill. That just drains the difficulty factor and raising it again irresponsibly at random. Speaking of irresponsibility, you're timed for each stage to complete, and with a quote, beat 'em up, you think that you have to take out every enemy in your path in order to advance, but in reality, you could just breeze your way through without dealing with all that monkey business chasing you, no pun intended, and it's better to do that because if you stay behind and try to kill every enemy that appears on screen, I guarantee that you'll run out of time as the clock can drain quickly without you ever noticing. Even with that knowledge, you won't have a smooth time passing by the enemies as they can become a heavy burden. Occasionally, you'll encounter a small guy in a trench coat that will either give give you a health or simply fuck you over with a bomb. Each time you beat a stage, you'll be able to practice your moves along with a quote that appears randomly before starting. From reading these quotes, it doesn't make any sense for them to be in this game. If they were cool and cheesy one-liners, I can understand from then. Since this game doesn't have much of a story, it really does nothing to inspire anyone to keep playing, especially the poor stills of your character that are often reused every 3 stages you beat. The gameplay alone is extremely repetitive. No diversity to be found anywhere, no weapons to pick up, and there's no telling how many stages there are in the game. From what I know, there's 15 stages in total, but I've only managed to reach stage 12, and even before then, my patience had long since depleted. If a game like this refuses to take itself seriously, there's no reason for you to take it seriously either. The graphics are piss poor, especially when you compare it to games that came out prior to 1989. The character and enemy designs are so dull and uninspiring that they make Action 52 look like Skyrim. Not only that, but the still pics used after beating 3 stages look pathetic and messy, with no decent contrast, like as though the developers didn't give a crap about maintaining quality in their department. Even worse are the level designs. They're all flat and unappealing, not to mention repetitive. To add insult to injury, there are only 3 types of levels, meaning that they reuse the same 3 level backgrounds for every 3 stages you complete, with no alterations in sight, which is a clear indicator that this game was rushed. The controls don't fare better as they're complete garbage. Both A and B are used to attack with whatever the stages assign you with, and the third attack is executed by pressing both of the buttons together. All of these moves are extremely delayed that it gives your enemies enough time to beat you up non-stop, and there are times where even if you press the button hard, nothing will happen from your character, and it definitely applies to situations when enemies will have you stunned for a bit and you're not given anything to break free, rendering you vulnerable to attack. There's no counterattack or dodge moves or anything of the sorts, and it really doesn't help that up is jump, and any retro gamer will tell you how much they detest such a sin. The movement from the D-pad is loose that it can interfere with coming in range of the enemies or trying to evade them. On top of all that, being that this port was reworked by Mattel, they advertised it to be in a series of games compatible with the Power Glove. I will be frank, I don't own a Power Glove to test the mechanics of this game out. However, given that the gadget was nothing more than a stupid, unresponsive gimmick, I imagine that using the glove on this game would make the controls even more frustrating and overly complicated to contend with. Even without the glove, the controls on its own are nearly broken and unreliable, pretty much mirroring the Power Glove itself. And finally, the sound is some of the worst you'll ever hear in an NES game. With the exception of the still pics every 3 stages, the game reuses the same fucking monotonous tune throughout the entire experience in an infinite loop, and it never stops. The tune is irritating beyond belief, and it doesn't remotely sound like a hardcore melody or anything relating to such. It's like as though the composer used only 12 notes or so and tried to make some kind of melody that sounded decent, and the lead man just passed it as brilliant, like as though he's never heard of music in his life. No matter the reason, there's no excuse for bad music without having a guy plainly saying, "What the fuck is this?" So if you're going to play this game, make sure to mute the sound. Some time ago, I reviewed Cosmo Police Gallivant 2 Arrow of Justice for the Super Famicom, and I said it was the worst beat-em-up I have ever played. But now that I've played Bad Street Brawler, I'm not sure. I'd say both of them are bad in their own ways, being on different systems. At least the former had slightly more efforts into the details, but that's not to say I'd go back to play it. Overall, I can't recommend this game to anyone, even with the Power Glove factor mentioned. No one deserves to buy something that's crap and can't get their money refunded. The game as a whole is so stubborn and tiresome that you have a better chance adjusting to the controls and mechanics in Clay Fighter Takes 63 1/3 for the Nintendo 64. At least that game, along with the Sculptor's Cut edition, has much more creativity put into them. Bad Street Brawler for the NES is nothing more than a cheap knockoff of a popular franchise to cash in on the height of the beat-em-up trend, and fails to entertain and deliver anything unique to whoever fell prey to this wretched piece of shit. It's like they say, you get what you pay for, and you can't judge it by its cover. For me, you can't judge a game by its cover, but when you get into it, you sure as hell can from there. So yeah, I suggest none of you go through what I and many others did. Thanks for watching. I'm Riley SKYE, and until next time, see you later.